Yeah, the call of wild's always bringing me home. Call of wild's always bringing me home. Call of wild's always bringing me home.
All right. Well, hello, wild ones. Welcome to another episode of the Find Your Wild podcast. I am very excited to have Diane Boyd with me today, a research scientist with wolves for over 45 years now, right?
Yep.
And recently came out with an amazing book, which I finished a couple weeks ago, A Woman Among Wolves, which I have here. It was such a fun read, and I absolutely enjoyed it. And I really burned through that pretty quickly, which is hard for me to do nowadays. So, yeah, I would definitely recommend it. So thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Brianna. This is fun. Thanks.
Yeah, round two. Yeah, I am so excited. So for everybody listening that maybe, hasn't heard of you before, maybe just to give a brief background on your start into studying wolves.
I grew up in Minnesota. And so back in the 60s, 50s, when I was growing up, it was the only state in the lower 48 that had a viable wolf population, with the exception of about 25 on Isle Royal and maybe 3 or 4 or 5 in Wisconsin. That was it. There were no wolves anywhere else in the lower 48. So it gave me an opportunity to connect with Dave Meach, who was on my campus at the University of Minnesota St. Paul campus, and he is the premier wolf researcher, still is, going strong. And so
Wow.
that's one thing led to another. I kept bothering him and finally got my foot in the door.
Amazing. Yeah. So it's been an amazing journey for you being in the wolf space.
Yeah.
What initially brought you specifically to wolves?
Well, like I said, growing up in Minnesota, my connections with Dave Meach, I used to go to the Como Park Zoo and visit the captive wolves there. Not very satisfactory, but that was all you could do for city girl. And then moving and then recreating, doing a little camping up in the Boundaries Watercoon area in northern Minnesota, where there are wild wolves. And then following up on volunteer opportunities through a couple of different research programs.
Yeah, amazing. So it's probably been so incredible to see, wolves go from such a small population to what they are now.
Yeah.
Do we know around how many are now in the wild?
Where?
In the US at least.
Yeah.
I guess, well, in the US, and I know a lot of them come from Canada and Alaska, right?
Yeah. Well, just in the lower 48, there's probably about 3,000 or so in the West. That would be Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Oregon, Washington, California, and now Colorado. About 3,000. In the Midwest, there's quite a few more. I'd say probably about 4,500 or so. These are all gray wolves, and there's a different animal called the Mexican wolf and red wolves that I'm not going to probably talk about. But there's a small population, very small red wolf population, and the Mexican wolf, I think, is about 250 now down in Arizona and New Mexico.
Right. Yeah. I was lucky enough a couple months ago, back in November, I actually visited my friend Aspen, who's a wildlife guide and photographer down by the Alligator River National Park or National Refuge, and I got to see them from very far away, but it was still very, very cool.
Good.
And I could at least check that off my bucket list. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know it's even when you were tracking wolves, it's not there's a difference between kind of the celebrity wolves of Yellowstone and being able to actually see them where you were tracking them, right? It's not as easy, or you don't see them as often.
Yeah, when I worked up in the North Fork of the Flathead Glacier Park area and southeastern British Columbia and southwestern Alberta, and the mountains and the deep forests, you essentially never or very rarely ever saw them. And if you did, you'd be lucky to see them from the airplane, where you knew where they were because you were radio tracking them. You knew they were right down below your wingtip. It's not like
Right.
Yellowstone where I can drive up with my car and look for the people with the scopes and get out my thermos of hot chocolate and a sandwich and sit and watch wolves. It's just not like that in the early days of Montana.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting, right? Like I think that a lot of people that maybe think of wolves, their obviously first go to is to think of Yellowstone.
Right.
And it's actually not as easy to see them. So I think it makes it, much more, at least in my mind, much more appreciative that, there is a space where you could probably see them more often.
Hmm.
But even you tracking them for that long, it's not as easy to just see them.
No. No, it's
Yeah.
not.
Speaking of tracking, when I was reading your book, one of the things that I found very interesting and funny is how many times like you had wolves in the back of your truck. How many times would you say that you had a wolf in the back of your car while studying them?
More than two and less than 50.
And obviously this was like for like, obviously I want people to read the book, but like there were specific reasons why you had them in the back of your truck. It's not always like, oh, I'm just gonna throw a wolf
No,
in the back of my truck for
no, it's generally for the safety of the animal because you've captured it, you've sedated it, and you have to move it to another place to keep it safe while it's coming out of the drugs. That's generally what happens. I'm not translocating wolves. I'm not like picking them up here and driving them into Wyoming or something, but to keep the animals safe while it's recovering from the drugs.
right. Yeah, that makes sense. And I did find it very fascinating the tracking and the trapping aspect of making like studying the wolves, and I would love to learn a little bit more about what the specifics are about like the trapping of them, right? Like it's not as simple. Like you really, especially in the book, you really explain how clever these wolves are. It's not as simple as just leaving a trap out and then, oh yeah, you're going to get a wolf on it. Like you have to boil them and really make sure the scent is gone. So for people listening, to maybe tell them a little bit more about that process.
So I learned how to trap wolves in northern Minnesota by some people who were real good at it. And I've taken pieces here and there and modified what I found successful when I came to the mountains. I learned a lot by experience um, and mistakes that I didn't try to that I tried to not repeat. But basically, the most important thing is to make sure that the trap and the shoes you're wearing and the gloves you're wearing and the pants you're kneeling on and everything is scent free. So you have to take all that stuff and bury it in dirt or soil, and then the traps themselves are steel, so they don't hold a lot of scent, but steel in itself has an odor that wolves can detect. So I would take the
Mm.
traps, boil them in water with alder bark, which has tannins in it, which turn the steel black. Hang them after I boil them for a certain amount of time. Hang them carefully in a tree so they'd be outdoors in the wind for days or weeks. Just again removing any scent, and then I'd put them in a box with pine boughs in it. Um, I did everything I could to remove all evidence, all trace of human scent anywhere. That was kind of what made it successful.
Yeah. Yeah. And even with all that, right, there was still like a couple of wolves that were smart enough to kind of still know where it was.
Yeah, yeah. I had some wolves. Once you catch a wolf one time, it's very hard to recapture them. I had some animals that I caught 3 and 4 times, but very, very few. Usually you catch it once, you will never catch it again. And the ones that were recaptured more than once were generally the alpha or the dominant animals in the pack. So they're more likely to be confident enough to investigate odd scents or be out front. So that's kind of the general anecdotal correlation there.
Right. It's just amazing how intelligent they are. Like they're really the way that they think, and it's so different from dogs, right? Like they have these critical thinking skills that are probably missing from dogs, and through domestication, right? Like you see, it's probably like, because you have a love of dogs too, right? Like you definitely see a difference.
Oh yeah, each wolf is an individual, and they have a lot of difference and variation. That occurs because in order to live in a pack structure, if all animals were equal and equally dominant, they'd be posturing and fighting constantly to figure out who's top dog. So some animals are bolder, some are shyer, some are better hunters, some are better pup babysitters. So there's a lot of variety, just like in your dogs. I mean, yeah, of course, dogs are wolves, really.
Right. Just through time, right? They
Yeah.
have been able to be our buddies. So,
Yes.
um, yeah, and like it's so interesting too how, they that's the thing that I also love about wolves, is that they have this, each, like you said, they're all individuals, and even in a pack, like they have their own things that they're better at, or things that maybe they're not as good at, and what makes them really special. And I think that's one of the things that I also found interesting that you brought up in the book, is that typically when wolves are killed, it's not taken into account the individual, which I think is pretty important, because you could be killing a breeding pair, or like a breeding aspect of the pack. So that's not taken into account. And do you find that typically, like, wolves will dissipate more when a specific leader or a specific wolf is killed?
Yeah, I mean, all wolves are not created equal. So if a dominant or breeding animal is killed, be it male or female, um, oftentimes the pack responds. There's a lot of social turmoil within the pack. They may be jostling for new positions. They may be required to have another non-related animal come in to take over as a breeder, because it's generally a family group within the pack. And if both breeders are killed, um, the pack is likely to probably break up and disperse. So it's pretty important, if somebody's out trapping wolves or hunting wolves and they catch a yearling or something, not a big deal. But if they kill the alpha female, that's a pretty big deal. She's the most important member to the cohesion of the pack. And older wolves, and maybe they're not even the breeders anymore, but they've simply been around long enough to know life experiences, what we call wisdom. An old
Right.
wolf is considered old at age 6. That's old for a wolf.
Right. Right. Yeah, exactly. And it's, you see this too, like throughout the animal kingdom, of like, older and wiser animals, right? Like specifically what's coming to mind for me right now is, elephants and
Yeah,
orcas.
yeah.
There's always like this kind of matriarch, or,
Mhm.
someone that is leading the charge of passing on this wisdom to the younger ones. And I can't imagine it would be like, is it easy to tell what, like, the breeder female?
Sorry. I think I got a
That's
UPS
okay,
package.
no
My
worries.
wolves are letting me know the UPS man is there.
Yeah.
What did you ask?
um so, like, how, like, is it even possible to tell, like, unless you're tracking a pack, who the breeding pair is? Like, if people are say hunting them, like, is there even a way to differentiate?
Um, Most people who kill wolves, it's completely indiscriminate. Like if you put a trap out, whoever steps in and gets caught. If you're shooting wolves, it's usually you may or may not be able to determine gender or age, just because
Right.
it's pretty random. So, and
Yeah.
there's a lot more younger non-breeding wolves than there are breeding wolves.
Mm.
So just on happenstance, you're more likely to take an animal um, that is not a breeder, just based on the rough number of animals out there.
Got it. Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm not really for the killing of wolves, but, I'm obviously a wolf lover. But I
Mhm.
think that, there's obviously, wolves unfortunately create this big, you either love them or you hate them. There's this
Right.
big divide, right? And I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's because like we have dogs and that plays some sort of a role into it, but talking about ranchers and just trying to get the other side of how we can come together
Uh-huh.
in a society to bridge that gap. Like what are like some of the concerns that they like, I mean, besides I guess the obvious of that their cattle or their farm animals get killed, right?
Yes. The
That's probably the biggest.
the biggest challenges?
Yeah, like what are some of yeah, sorry, that was probably like a weird way to ask that question. But yeah, like some of the biggest like challenges in regards to maybe bridging that gap or, you know.
Yeah, keeping wolves out of livestock. And working with hunters to help realize what wolves actually do and do not do to game populations. There's lots of myths out there about that, and there's a lot of science if people want to listen to it. I talk about that in my book. A lot of the challenges with wolves are based on misperceptions and not on reality, but it doesn't mean that people will change their mind or that people still won't be afraid, you know?
Right. I find like the more that we learn and we know about something, the less
Mhm.
things become so fearful too.
Yes.
So, and I know that's sometimes hard to bridge that gap. But yeah, like there was a scene in your book too where you were talking with a bunch of people that were very riled up about, you know, the elk population and you know, the wolves coming in and you know, there's all of these misconceptions, but you know, another thing that you probably find too is that, you know, elk populations move. I was chatting with somebody the other day too that was on the podcast, and he was talking about in Yellowstone, I think there was a documentary or a book called Invasive, and they were introducing like invasive species to Yellowstone. And the grizzly bears were actually taking out all the elk. So there's all these other proponents, right, that could happen that aren't
Mhm.
just wolves.
No, I mean, wolves are only one of, well, I can name 10 factors right offhand. Fires, climate change, grizzlies, wolves, hunting. It goes on and on and on. Browse, heavy, of course, the intensity of a winter has more impact potentially in one winter than all the others added together. And man, you can have huge die-offs from a really severe winter that pale and I mean that the other things pale in comparison to. So yeah, wolves are just one little piece, but they're an easy one to
Right.
blame for some reason.
Yeah, like, you know, and grizzlies hunt elk too, but I don't
Oh yeah.
see them taking it as much, right? As much heat as the wolves do.
No, and it's actually, if you get the chance to go to Yellowstone about the first or second week of June and watch grizzlies hunting elk, if you ever get so lucky. I've gone and never been able to witness it, but I've seen a lot of film footage. Those mother grizzlies and the big grizzlies, they're really good at finding elk calves and killing them. Really, really good at it. They just run a grid, and they're really effective.
Yeah. Yeah, so you know, it's funny that they get almost tunnel vision on this one aspect of wolves, but there's such a huge amount of other things that are
Mhm.
very effective in unfortunately killing elk as well. I mean,
Yep,
even the way that we destroy landscapes and affect maybe where they breed or where they hang out, that
yep.
can push them further away or whatever, right?
And subdivisions built in the middle of the valley bottoms, which is elk winter range. I mean, it just goes, the list goes on and on.
Yeah, it's not always as simple as just okay, we're going to blame wolves. And
Right.
another thing that's interesting that you talk about is that wolves aren't I mean that's why they're in packs. It's not like they're mountain lions. They're not like the best like single killers. They need to be together in order to kill, right?
Yeah, wolves are what you call cooperative obligatory hunters. They cooperate because they're obliged to bring down prey that is, you know, 3 or 4 times as big as they are. And not true for mountain lion. Mountain lion's a really amazing and effective predator because it's got like sets of teeth on every hand. It's got all those sharp claws to hang on to. But wolves only have their mouth. And if you think about
Right.
having every time you want to eat, you have to catch your prey with your teeth. There's lots of hazards to that. You get kicked in the jaw,
Yeah.
might be the end.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's I can imagine how that's rough. Being wild is not easy to make a
No,
living every day or get something to eat.
right.
Um yeah, and also with like the, I guess going back to the ranching thing, I think that there, have you seen that there's been like more studies that non-lethal methods are that work better than killing wolves?
There are non-lethal methods that work to keep wolves out of cattle, but most of them are short term because wolves are really clever and they
Mm,
learn eventually to test it. Like you have the same thing going on in the same place and time, be it a propane cannon or flattery, which is hanging flagging, or something that is hanging there or sitting there for months. Wolves eventually figure out, I've been around that thing for 3 months now and it hasn't caused me any harm. I think I'll check it out. And whatever it is, they'll figure out that it is not going to hurt them, and then they may just begin to go around it. So the effective thing
yeah,
about non-aversive conditioning, non-lethal conditioning, is that it has to be moved, it has to be modified, it has to be, you have to work with it to make sure that things are up and running, and so the wolves don't get used to it.
right, right, exactly. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think the last time we chatted too, we talked about in Colorado they're deploying range riders. Do you think
Yeah,
that that might be the best because it's not the same thing every time? That's
yeah.
granted.
So time has shown that our traditions that many of us Europeans came from, that shepherding and having people out with the flocks is by far the most effective. And the other thing is with shepherds, they move the flock. So they're coming to new places. It's always dynamic. And so it's not like a propane cannon that goes off every 5 minutes from the same location, or flattery that hangs from a fence that's been hanging from the same
Right.
fence for 6 months. Having people in the landscape and a human presence, just the noise and the smell and the perhaps unexpectedness of a range rider showing up on a horse someplace, it's really quite effective to keep wolves away. The biggest
Yeah,
the
it'll
biggest
be
problem that it could fail is, here in the West anyway, people turn out after they've calved or lambed, after they've done with that, then they turn their livestock out into very, very large leases. Maybe it's their own land, maybe it's a Forest Service lease, and they just turn them out and you don't see them again. So it's really hard to effectively have a range rider out unless they have um, pastures that they can move the animals from one to another pasture. Otherwise, they're just out there. It makes it difficult.
I yeah, I can imagine so. Yeah, definitely. Um yeah, and it also is interesting too with the, with obviously the Colorado introduction and everything like that, and with these range riders coming in, it'll be interesting to see how that works out, especially with what you were saying with how they just kind of let the some of the cattle out. It'd be hard to find them right every
Mhm.
single time, or where
Mhm.
they've moved, and to account for everything. But I also wanted to bring up too is that wolves, there isn't a huge amount of wolf attacks, so they're naturally inclined to not, I think maybe they're just scared of us, right? Like they're pretty skittish of humans. There's not as many wolf attacks as say like grizzly or mountain lion attacks.
Wolf attacks, you talking on livestock or people?
I'm sorry, I'm people.
Yeah. Okay. Because we were just talking about livestock. I want to make sure. So yeah, wolves.
Yeah.
There are every year lions, mountain lions, and grizzlies, and coyotes, and deer, and bison. Every year, people are killed by these animals. It's very uncommon to have humans attacked. Very uncommon by wolves. Which, to be real honest, that's always amazed me because they're able to bring down something as large and feisty as an elk or even a bison. It's like, why wouldn't they kill a person? I mean, people are pretty puny, But
Yeah.
I think it's just been selected against for so long. People have been persecuting wolves for so long. The ones that survive that are the ones who aren't bothering people. I just think it's really ingrained. And the fact that we've
Yeah.
got dogs from wolves, there's a relationship there for sure.
Yeah, especially because, like we were talking about, like the wisdom being passed down, and then like who knows what, right? Like what proponents of the domestication of wolves to dogs, or just the persecution of them has kind of made them be like, okay, these people are bad. We've got to stay
Right,
away from them.
right.
Yeah. One of the other things that I found absolutely fascinating was the coat color of the black coat,
Hmm.
and how maybe just talk about that a little bit more, that they had, I guess, is there like scientific evidence that they were once domesticated and then were reintroduced to the wolf population? Like, I mean, ancient long time ago, right?
Yeah. So first of all, clarification: I am not a geneticist.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm summarizing what I've read. Okay.
Right.
So
Okay. Fair.
long ago, when people began domesticating dogs from wolves, we took wolves into captivity or made an alliance with them of somehow, and generally we kept selecting for tamer and tamer wolves until we ended up having pretty tame wolf-like animals, and pretty soon we were putting pressure on and become dogs. In that process, there's genetic mutations which are natural, and one of the mutations we've selected for in dogs is like floppy ears, like a Labrador Retriever, curly tail, like a Husky, and black color coats. These are mutations that have come about through our selective pressures. So they found that with the black color coat in wolves, which is pretty common now, we see lots of black wolves, but it has, besides being different looking, it has different resistance to canine distemper virus, for example. Did you want me to talk about that?
Yeah, I found that very interesting.
Yeah. So it's interesting because in wolves, they're black and gray color forms, and the black color form can be heterozygous or homozygous. It can carry a black color. The black gene, the black wolf, generally is more resistant to canine distemper. And so during periods of canine distemper outbreaks in the population, which by the way came from dogs, gray
Right.
wolves will tend to select black wolves for their mate. Statistically significant. I mean, they don't
Wow.
know this, but somehow it works. But when there's not
Right.
canine distemper outbreaks, gray wolves have a higher probability of surviving overall. So it's not an advantage to breed with a black wolf, which has a lower overall survival rate, except in its immune resistance to distemper. And somehow these wolves have kind of figured it out. We're not reading genetics textbooks, but they've shown in Yellowstone that it's just statistically significant on how many times that happens. It's just the reason I think being is that the K locus that hosts the black color gene is pretty close to where the respiratory disease immunity genes are. So they're pretty closely linked. Pretty cool
Wow.
stuff.
That's really cool. That's amazing. It just shows like maybe they just have some, I mean, I don't know, but like maybe they just have some sort of like intuition, like this pull, right? To like, I don't know, to bond or like mate with a black wolf, but that it's, I don't know, nature's fascinating in that way, and I think that that's what is cool about science, is like you get these little nuggets of, oh
Yeah.
wow, that's really fascinating, right?
Right. I mean, and some people who are sort of anti-science, like, well, you're always changing the game. I said, that's because science is a process of learning. The science used to be that the earth was flat. And as we gain more knowledge, we now know that the earth is round and the sun doesn't go around the earth goes around the sun. Well, that's not because science is false. It's because science is always investigating. And as we gain more knowledge, the scientific paradigms change. Thank goodness.
Right, I think change is good in ways, right? Like, I mean, uh that's how we survived as humans. I think that's how wolves survive, is like they're constantly changing.
Mhm.
So I think to be still in one fact, I always say that I'm always open to changing my mind given new information, which I
Yeah.
think is how it should be. Yeah.
Yeah, we all should be. We should
Yeah.
evolve and learn as individuals, and that'll help us, resist as a species to changes that come up.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe a more philosophical question for you, and you could take a moment to answer if you need it, but
Okay.
what do you think that like you've learned like the most through your studies of wolves through all these years?
Oh gosh, the thing that really stuck out is when I came to Montana 46 years ago, I thought that wolves were very touchy about and being anywhere near humans or disturbance. And I was pleasantly surprised to learn that wolves are incredibly resilient. Thank goodness, because if they weren't, they would never have survived the onslaught of methods we've devised to kill them. But they're always
Yeah.
changing too. They change and evolve, and they've become harder to trap now than they were when I first started. Um, and the other
Wow.
thing is the importance of their cleverness and intellect in problem solving and remaining as a functioning pack. They have to be a team member. And that was really important for me to realize because I've always been a bit of a loner, and kind of as I've matured and learned a lot more, I'm coming to realize that integrating with people and learning better communication skills and working with somebody is a whole lot more productive than just saying no.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, sometimes, I think even myself, I mean, I tend to like my own personal time being alone, but I think that I also find that it's very hard to ask for help too. So
Right.
I feel like that's a good connection there, is because like they are such a teamwork, and
Oh,
I think there are a lot of similarities between us as humans and wolves as species. One of Hi, wild ones. I hope you're enjoying this episode of the Find Your Wild podcast. This episode is brought to you by my clothing brand Femme Sauvage, and I'm going to link that in the description below, along with a little discount code for you. Be sure to check it out. We also donate $5 with each of our animal designs towards specific charities. I will also have those in the description below, and enjoy the rest of the episode. Thanks so much for listening. One of my earlier podcast guests, his name's David Ian Howe, and he studies ethnocenology, which is like the history of dogs. And obviously the beginning of that, their relationship
mhm,
from early humans and when they domesticated them. And he was just talking about them being a technology for us, and like the ultimate partnership, and how we actually have very similar hunting styles. So that's
mhm,
probably, where that relationship evolved, is, oh, okay, I guess somewhat symbiotic relationship, like, the
mhm.
working together.
Yeah, I talk about that in one of my chapters. I think it's called Wolves and Fear, or Fear and Wolves, about some studies that postulate how wolves and humans began to interact. And we did not collaborate because it was a nice thing to do. It was a brutal world, but we learned we could go up to wolves and steal some of their kills. And pretty soon the wolves would learn that, gee, if they backed off just for a minute, that the humans could come in with spears and atlatls and kill something without the wolves having to risk being kicked in the face. And so it was sort of a mutualistically beneficial, not because of any altruism, just because everybody survived
It
it. And it's postulated. I mean, there's no way of knowing. That's the fun about archaeology and paleontology. It's like, well, we can't really say, but it makes
Sure.
sense to me. And the fact that dogs are really, for the most part, cooperative to us and to each other. Yeah. So wolves are too.
Right, shows that. I follow a really awesome photographer online too. Her name's Savannah, and she does a lot of trail cam work as well, which is really awesome. And she got this really cool shot and it was like the first time I ever learned something like that, was a coyote and a badger symbiotically working together, which I had no idea. I thought that was fascinating.
I've seen that too, and especially in Yellowstone where it's easier to see them. But yeah, it's mind-boggling the things that we learn. I love trail cameras. I have several up at my property, and I used them in my work. And the stuff that you can catch when humans aren't around is pretty mind-boggling.
Yeah, so cool. And I feel like it just it really reminded me of like that initial probably relationship that wolves and humans had together too, is that it probably worked out better. Like the badger is good at digging, and like, their both of their strengths ally together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I guess going back a little bit to the black coat, and one of the stories, I won't like give it away or anything like that, but you captured a black wolf that had, I forget what the name of the wolf that you called her, but she had blue eyes, right? And that's
Mm-hmm.
typically really unusual.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously we don't have any DNA from that, right? But like, would you probably find that it was a she, right? That she
Yeah.
might have maybe
It's a,
had some dog DNA?
well, theoretically, any wolf that expresses the black color coat goes back to when a dog was introduced into the lineage 10,000 years ago or whatever. It's ancient. It's not recent. This wolf
Right.
had kind of ice-colored eyes, ice blue. We named her Ice, and she also was very cold and hypothermic. But
Mm,
I saw a
right.
wolf. I saw a wolf in northern Minnesota when I was working there that also had kind of a opalescent colored eyes and a white blaze down the forehead like a horse. That was
Oh,
bizarre.
wow.
But
Wow.
it was a wild wolf, and we see these things that are odd, and we have to ask, gee, I wonder if there's a dog in that somehow. But the reality is, everything has a chance to have a mutation, and
Sure.
the different eye color, different coat color, it has a capability of being within that animal to have that change, born with a different mutation or coming back from a long time ago and it just surfaces now. So I don't think she had
Sure.
dog in her. She just was
Got
unusual
it.
color eyes.
Yeah. Because that's like super rare. I don't think, like, even nowadays, I don't think I've ever seen a wild wolf pop up that had that. So it's very interesting.
They're usually yellow. They're not, and it's interesting to me if you think about our domesticated animals, we work pretty hard for the most part to make most of our domestic animals somehow have brown eyes versus uh, yellow eyes of wild animals, whether it's a predator or prey animal. Matter of fact, my little Griffon here, I really love the breeder. He does a good job, but my dog's eyes are quite light brown, bordering on yellow, golden. And
Wow.
he calls
Cool.
them, he calls them predator eyes, and he says, "I do everything I can to breed away from predator eyes." Sorry, I thought. Sorry, she's beautiful. So,
I'll take her.
and I know when I was in high school, we had one girl in our high school class who had one brown eye and one green blue eye, and
Oh,
nothing,
wow.
nothing wrong with her vision. There you go. There's just an unusual mutation. So, I mean, stuff happens.
Right. Yeah, genetics is very fascinating that way,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Um we can stray away from the topic, but I was going to ask you, especially with all this genetic stuff coming
Mhm.
up, what your thoughts about the dire wolf that, has been blowing up the blowing up the internet.
Yes. Oh, the dire wolf hoopla, as I call it. So, the best
Yeah.
of my knowledge is that the colossal company was able to uh, look at the genotypes of dire wolves through some ancient samples, fossils, and they were able to determine that at 14 sites out of 19,000 gene sites, 14 of them, they could see a little different nucleotide sequence. That being the AGCT, the four basic the building blocks in the nucleotides. And so what they did was replicate that same AGCT or TCAG or whatever, the sequence that was from a dire wolf that was different from a gray wolf. So they're calling that creating a dire wolf. They didn't actually interject any dire wolf DNA into these genes, and it's
Right.
14 changes out of 19,000. So, did they create a dire wolf? I would say no. I would say it's an interesting process, and it certainly has amazing potential for conservation of other animals that still exist or extant, like but very rare, like condors or red wolves or black-footed ferrets, where you could reproduce a clone-like animal. But did they create a dire wolf? No. And I found it
Right.
between you and me and the camera here, I found it a little unnerving that some people have used this hoopla, say, for example, our present administration, to say, oh, well, geez, we don't need to worry about endangered species anymore because we can just recreate them in the lab if they go extinct. So we're going to do away with the Endangered Species Act. That's very alarming to me because
I
of the
couldn't agree
hoopla,
more.
not
Yeah.
because of the science.
Right. Right. It's actually straying away from the science and what the benefits could do, because, it's I always say it's a lot harder to heal something, and right, and when you're trying to do conservation work, you're trying to heal the environment. There's so much effort and time. It takes so much more effort to put that in and to heal something and heal an ecosystem than it is to just go out and kill something.
And,
So you
and
can't take that back.
yeah, and you think about, so if we've caused the extinction of an animal, say the white rhino or almost extinction of ferrets or something, are we under
Yeah.
obligation, if we have the technology, to bring it back? Perhaps so. Are we aware enough of why woolly mammoths and direwolves went extinct to really have the ability to say, well, gee, if we bring them back, they'll have a place on Earth? No, they went extinct because of forces that are not, at least in direwolves, not human caused. It was due to climate change, and the gray wolves simply outcompeted the direwolves, much like the Cro-Magnon outcompeted Neanderthals. So it's an evolution
Right.
based on climate change, and the one that's better adapted to use that landscape and the tool set that they have make it, and the others don't. What are you going to do with these two little cute little white pups? They're going to live the rest of their life in a pen. I mean, I personally find that kind of sad, but I do think the science has good merit for good conservation work, just not dire wolves.
Right, right. And, I don't know, I don't, they say that they used it, they started with dire wolves because it would directly affect, hopefully, the red wolf, efforts. And I know that sometimes there's bottlenecking, I guess, in genetics. So, hopefully, I mean, obviously it's a little past my pay grade, thinking about that stuff, but I like the idea of the hope that that could really help with the conservation efforts and things like that. And if there is a genetic problem, and then also doing it in a humane way, like, that they're taking it from the blood and not a tissue sample, is also very fascinating.
Yeah, and with the red wolves, I mean those animals, they're called ghost wolves down in the Texas coast in Galveston Island. They're a coyote that oftentimes has quite a bit of red wolf DNA in it, and I kind of think to myself, why didn't the company simply pursue that option and perfect it from that animal versus
Right.
a dire wolf, which has no touch base in reality whatsoever, and it's one of the species that evokes more fear in humans than any other that I can think of. So why not start with a practical application instead of going for something that's just so fantastical? I guess that's my thought.
Fair. Yeah, I think that's really good, and it makes a lot of sense. And I'm glad that you clarified too the 19 or whatever, 19th,
14.
the whatever.
Out
Yeah.
of yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. um but going back, I guess, to your beginnings of when you're trapping wolves and studying them and slowly seeing them come back on the landscape.
Mhm.
I know that there's a big thing now with CWD, with this disease in deer. Do we have any evidence that wolves are helping to control that population, or is it really just that they're probably going to focus on the weaker links in the population?
So that's a question that is being debated, and there's a lot of people who would like it to be true that wolves and lions can effectively slow or stop the spread of CWD. The reality is they do take whatever prey animals are most vulnerable. So if they saw a deer and elk that was sick with CWD, they could catch it more easily than a healthy animal. So they would probably end up, say, if you had a healthy herd, one is lagging and it's got CWD, that'd probably be the one they would get. But the reality is by the time that elk or deer is showing signs and weakness from CWD, it's already had it a long time and it's been spreading the prions already for months and months. So maybe they could potentially slow the spread, but they're certainly not going to stop it. And I would love to say, oh yeah, there'll be a big help in stopping that process, but
Of course.
I don't think that's quite the reality. They take whatever they
Right.
can catch, and usually that's the sick or the old or the weak, but not always. Sometimes if the snow conditions are just right or they have the element of surprise, wolf pack can take a perfectly healthy animal, but nature didn't evolve that way or to them to kill all the healthy animals, you know.
Right. They're only taking what they need. That's like the basis right behind animals hunting is like they're not going to overtake, you know. There's this myth, right? Like I guess like myth busting some of the wolf misconceptions
Mhm.
is that wolves just kill just to kill. Did you ever find that in any of your studying them for all those years?
So we have to look at it longer term rather than a snapshot. So I found one scenario one winter where the snow was incredibly deep and the wolf pack came in, it was crusted, and wolves were floating more on the snow, and the deer, and I think there was an elk there too, couldn't leave. They couldn't get away. And the wolves killed more than they could eat in that day. Did they come back every few days or week? Yes. Did other animals benefit from the kills? Yes. I think they killed like 4 animals. If that happened every day, that would be really hard on the game populations. So people want to say, I read somewhere down in the deer wintering yard in Wisconsin, wolves came in and they killed 27 deer. Well, show me the pictures, I would say, first of all, because they probably starved. But it occasionally happens. They call it surplus killing. It doesn't happen very often, or it would be really counterproductive to survival in the long run. So, it's not that it never happens. It's just not that common.
Right. And I can only imagine that, like you said, it takes really specific conditions for that because it's also an energy game living in the wild, right? Is how much energy are you expending and taking in? So, I mean, just realistically, it doesn't make sense that they would do that more often than not because, they're expending so much energy doing that.
Well, and they kill their prey base. So why would you do that?
Yeah.
Right.
Right. And I guess another myth that I would love to ask you about is the idea that Canada has super wolves and that the Yellowstone wolves are these big super wolves that had came in and they're bigger than usually, but that's not typically the case, right?
No, I mean, I devote a chapter to discussing that too in my book, about the wolves are all connected through dispersal. The amount of distance a wolf can cover in a reasonable length of time, a few weeks or months, basically ranges from the Yukon to the Yellowstone. I mean, that's one animal population for a walkabout for a wolf. And we've seen that through radio collars. So if you take a wolf from where they took these wolves from Yellowstone in Idaho, from Fort St. John's and Hinton, they're no different than the wolves that have walked on here from Canada. It's the same wolf. So that's a myth.
Yeah.
The other thing to remember, I was just having this discussion with a colleague this morning, is that of the wolves that were reintroduced to Yellowstone, 31 were taken from Canada. But the year after they finished kind of reintroducing, there were 10 more wolves from the Sawtooth Pack on the Rocky Mountain front here in Montana, straight east of me, that due to livestock depredations and capturing the pack, they took 10 Montana wolves and then put those down in Yellowstone too. So of the 41 wolves, not 31, that were reintroduced to Yellowstone, 25% of them were native Montana wolves. People don't know that. They don't think about that. And I actually didn't have that in my book. But we were just discussing this morning. So I have to bring that up.
To add that in, right?
Yeah.
So it's and right, and that's like a huge. They really go. They have such a big range, and what they're able to travel is incredible. They're just
Yeah.
an incredible endurance species. So, do you think that it would? I mean, I think you might have talked about this in your book, but it probably would have been likely that they would have moved down into Yellowstone anyway, kind of like what's going on in Colorado. You think that they probably would have eventually wound up there naturally?
I feel that pretty strongly, and my colleagues and I have a little friendly debate about it, but I'm not the only one who feels that way because, as I
Right.
described in my book, two wolves showed up in Yellowstone in 1992 or 91. One was filmed in the Hayden Valley feeding on a bison carcass with a grizzly and some wolves. It was
Mm,
it was a wild wolf living amongst the wildlife. And then the other one was a black wolf that was shot just south of Yellowstone Park in Wyoming in Fox Creek area. And we ran the genetics on that one. And that wolf had the genetics most similar to wolves from the 9 Mile, Montana, which is Missoula. And there's wolves in the 9 Mile. So that wolf walked down through Yellowstone.
right.
So wolves were starting to get there. And I feel Yellowstone in the early 1990s was where we were here in the Northwest Montana in about 1980. We're getting a few wolves coming down now and then. They have a pathway to get there, and it's just a matter of time until they find a mate and hit critical mass. And wolves were reproducing in Colorado, 4 years before these reintroductions started. And so, but
Mm.
we can debate that forever. It won't matter now because you can't go back.
Of course. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And, I think that one of the things that I find very interesting too is that we're clearly probably one of the biggest threats to wolves, right? With wolf
Yeah.
hunting, and
Yeah.
you hear it all the time with wolves, straying away outside of Yellowstone, and many Yellowstone wolves get caught in this, you know, legal battle of wolf hunting.
Mhm.
um and I don't know what the answer is, but I know you've talked about them being on the endangered species list, or not being on the endangered species list. But what would you say is like a good, I don't know, like what's a good medium, I guess? Like do you think that they have to be more protected federally, because they obviously don't know state boundaries and things
Right.
like that, and their areas are so big where
Mhm.
they yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the purpose of the Endangered Species Act, and then I will get through that, and you can edit as needed. But the Endangered Species
Perfect. Yeah.
Act, the Endangered Species Act was created to provide funding to help protect and reestablish species that are truly endangered. Okay, there was a time in the lower 48 when wolves were there. We now have, oh my goodness, boys, between Alaska and the in the lower 48, we've got almost 11,000 wolves here. And then
Wow.
in between, tens of thousands of more in Canada. And then you go over to Europe and Russia. It's been estimated that there's about 250,000 wolves in the world. Are
Wow.
they truly endangered? By the ESA, I'd have to say no. Not like the black-footed ferret or the condor or something that really is critical. Like the whooping crane was at one point. There was just a handful, and now they're coming back. That's what the act is designed for. It's not designed to help people who so love wolves that they never want to see any killed. And I really, really, I guess I have to say I love wolves. But if I
Of
want to talk
course.
about
Yeah.
the ESA, are they truly an endangered species? No, they are not. They are habitat generalists. They're food generalists. They would live anywhere that will tolerate them. It's not like a grizzly bear or a ferret. So what I would like to see regarding wolf management is for the individual states who are now in charge, for the most part, in charge of managing their wolves, especially in the West, the individual states to treat them as a respected game animal or a respected species of some kind with certain seasons, if they're going to have a season, and have them have some value. I don't see that a lot in some of the Western states. They're just targeting them to bring the numbers down really quickly and remove as many as possible because they're vermin. That's the message you get, and I would like to see that changed. Whether they're listed or not really has little to do with that.
Yeah, thanks for the clarification on that, because I feel like that does make a lot of sense when you put it that way, in that perspective, right?
Yeah.
That it's for very, very critical animals that really need it. But it does make sense, and obviously I don't want to see wolves hunted. I mean, I personally, I don't understand, besides getting their coat, what value, right? Because I think with deer, when you're hunting deer or something else,
Mhm.
you're mostly using every aspect of that animal and cooking and eating and
Mhm.
storing that food and that lasts for such a long time.
Mhm.
But, killing predators doesn't really make as much sense to me. And that you say in your book too that they tend to manage their own numbers. They don't really need us to intervene.
Exactly. No, I know. I mean, when I worked for the state, I had to go out and tag dead wolves that people would bring in with a CITES tag and all that. And I don't like to see it wolves stacked up dead on the tailgate either.
Yeah.
Believe me.
Yeah.
But the value that some of those people related. So say you go out and you shoot a big deer. Most people who shoot a big deer and always save the antlers and they have them on the wall. And many, many years after you finish consuming that animal, you still have your trophy to think about. Some people feel that way about wolves. Some people feel that it's a pretty amazing animal and they want a trophy to represent it. Now, I don't have that philosophy because I'm not a trophy hunter at all of anything. But
Right.
that is a value. Whether it's one I agree with or not, or you agree with or not, is up for debate.
Right.
What I don't
Right.
like to see is people who just hate them and consider them vermin and we got to kill every one we come across. That's a negative value.
Right. Right. I can see that. Yeah, that makes sense. And it's also this, coming together, right? Like being in a society with people that have different values with us, and like how do we bridge this gap to maybe help them better understand that wolves are not vermin, like, and that the environment is, that each of these animals that are there do have a place, right? And like you said, like I'm not somebody that agrees, and like you said, like you don't want to see a trunk full of dead wolves and everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess like with people and ranchers and things like that those people have the biggest gripe with wolves
Yes.
for a reason. It's different than people that just have these general grand
Yeah.
misconceptions of wolves.
Yeah, and also the ranching community has been provided with tools to kill wolves. And I talked to one fellow when I was giving a talk about a month ago, and he said he had and a wolf came in and killed one of his calves, and he felt powerless. He said, "Well, call everybody you know because every person in the world can come to Montana and kill up to 20 wolves. There's no limit on the number of licenses given, 10 per shooting, 10 with trapping. If you got problems with wolves, you as a landowner and the livestock grower can shoot that wolf 24/7. You can shoot them now in the dark with lights and electronic calls. You're not powerless. You can take care of the problem. So it's different than it was when they were fully endangered.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess just like with wolves that have hunted cattle, I mean, once they start doing that, is it almost impossible to get them to not do that anymore? I mean, obviously it's
I,
not a trained animal, right? It's a
no,
wild
no.
animal, but yeah.
I think I think the jury's still out on that. I mean, if I was a wolf and I was hungry, I'd be in there killing cattle because they're the slowest thing out there, But they're pretty big; they're
Right.
formidable. But some wolves kill cattle, and it seems like it seems like when they learn to, unless they have some kind of very strong aversive conditioning, or if they have a shortage of wild prey, they're more likely to. But some individual wolves tend to keep doing that. And those wolves, if they're removed from the population, sometimes it gives a little relief to the rest of them. But there's been some really good studies out there. I cite them in my book about removing livestock depredating wolves and what's been learned in Minnesota and Montana and various places, studying which wolves are taken or not taken and what the long-term effect is. Again, we have to think long-term, not next week on these kind of problems.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and I really enjoyed your book also. I feel like it was just a very fun read, and I
Oh,
really enjoyed hearing your stories and everything like that. I guess it's just kind of maybe like my last question for you. What was the one wolf that you studied and interacted with that you think made the most impact on you?
it was Wolf 8550, whose name was Phyllis.
Oh,
Yeah,
that
I
was a
wrote a
beautiful
chapter.
story.
Yeah. But partly because we had her in the air for so many years, so we got to learn a lot about her and about wolf population dynamics by following her and her pack mates, the challenges she faced, and then the known story of the last couple of years of the end of her life. We usually don't know what happens. A wolf goes off the air, the collar quits transmitting, and you don't know. But this wolf was very uniquely marked, and she had some unique behaviors, and we knew exactly where she was, when she was there, and how she died. So that made her a very unique individual. And as you know from reading the book, I tell the story from three different viewpoints, mine being one of the three.
Yeah, I really appreciated that a lot too, and I think that that's one of the reasons why I really love following you, and when you speak about things is because you are trying to come at things from such a neutral approach, and try to get different perspectives. And even though you had this kind of emotional tie to Phyllis, like you still were able to kind of get the perspectives of those other people, and I think it was pretty impactful, especially when reading it. So I would definitely urge listeners to pick up your book, because I really loved that, especially that chapter. I thought was pretty powerful.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a hard one and a fun one to write. Parts of it were really fun because I tried to catch her for the rest of her life. She was caught accidentally the first time, and then no matter what I did, I pulled out all my stops. I could never catch her again. I know she walked by my traps. So she outsmarted me a lot, and I have to respect her for that.
Yeah, that's one of the cool things about appreciating wolves is their intelligence, and
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, Diane, I think that's a great spot to end. Thank you so much for taking the time to come back on and to chat with me. And it was so nice to learn more from you. And for people listening, her book is called A Woman Among Wolves. And it's an amazing book. I read it so quick, so I would definitely recommend it. And where else can people find you and connect with you?
So you can go to your local bookstore, wherever you are, and they can order it. I've got books in lots of bookstores in Montana, or you can go to Amazon. But if the local bookstore doesn't have one in stock, they'll order it for you, I'm sure. But yeah, they're
Yeah.
available Barnes and Nobles as well.
Awesome. Lovely. And I'll make sure to link everything below so people can easily access that. And it's always nice to support your local bookstore too.
Yes. Yes, it is. So,
Yes.
wow, thank you. This has been really interesting. You asked some great questions, and I always learn a lot when I do a podcast or talk to a group. I get things I've been asked and I haven't thought about before, and it's fun for me
Good.
and hopefully for your listeners.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I tried to, because I've heard you a couple times, and I wanted to touch on some different things to hopefully give people listening a different a different chat or some different questions. So yeah, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come on. It was so enjoyable to be able to chat with you. So I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thanks so much. And thanks so much, Wild Ones, for listening. And we'll catch you on the next one. Bye.
Revel in the moment like a river flowing to the sea. I feel the energy of life force flowing all through me, and I'll allow it all to dance with my body and